Hello and welcome to Ebbie on Senior Living. I'm your host, Charles Ebbie Alfree, and each month I will focus on a topic that will interest seniors and the people who love and care for them. For my first show, I'm joined by Nancy Pine, a partner of the law offices of Pine and Pine. She is here to discuss and help us better understand elder law. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Ebbie.
I'm so excited to have you as my first guest.
Thank you. It is. I'm privileged. I am privileged. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I don't think the viewers know that you're also a friend of mine, so we're friends as well.
Yes,
so
that's so true.
So
it makes it
here.
much more comfortable.
Exactly. So why don't we start off by having you tell us about the law offices of Pine and Pine?
Sure. So our firm has been in various iterations for over 50 years. I haven't been practicing 50 years, but my father-in-law, Norman Pine, started the firm, and he and my husband practiced together. I practiced with both of them, and now my husband and I practice together. So we have several attorneys in our firm and a paralegal, and our practice focuses basically on estate planning and elder law.
Great. And maybe we should also start off with talking about what is elder law. We use that term, but I don't know if everybody understands what that exactly is.
That's true, and that's a great question. So elder law has really just come into being in the past 25 to 30 years. And it is a broad range of practice that touches on everything that involves older adults. So it's not only estate planning, it is asset protection, it is Medicaid planning, it is protection from abuse, real estate, all kinds of issues that affect our older population.
Sure. So there's a lot for us to discuss today about this topic. So why don't we start off with estate planning and people preparing for the future, and I think, most people think of wills.
Right, and that's true. And most people think of estate planning as something for the very wealthy. People will say, well, I don't have enough to do an estate plan. And I always say, if you have people that you love, causes that you care about, or even pets, you need to have a will.
Sure.
Because without a will, that means that you would, when you pass, your estate is distributed according to the intestacy laws of Pennsylvania, which could end up people inheriting that you had no intention of inheriting from your estate.
Sure. So it's so important that they have that in place.
It's incredibly important. And without a will, you can't leave money to a charity that may be very important to you. And without a will, you can't make provisions for the care of your pets after you pass.
Oh, sure.
So wills are incredibly important. But estate planning involves more than wills. It involves powers of attorney, financial powers of attorney, and healthcare powers of attorney, which are incredibly important. Powers of attorney are documents where you name an agent who will be able to manage your finances, be able to take care of everything that you could otherwise do yourself in the event that you're unable.
Sure.
And so that's a financial power of attorney. And let me just say, we often assume that our spouse or someone else close to us automatically has a power of attorney, and that is not the case.
So I was wondering, when you bring up spouse, so does somebody just assume that position, or do you have to actually assign somebody that? So like your spouse, or if you have a child?
Absolutely, you have to appoint them.
You have to appoint them.
And it has to be in a written document that your agent can then use or present to the bank or whatever needs to be done. They then have that authorization in writing. So it's never an automatic. You always have to name and appoint your agent.
And so as an elder law attorney, you help people with going through this process.
Absolutely.
Because I'm sure there's a lot of levels to it and things that they must, go through to
Right. So what
figure
we
this all
do,
out.
our approach is a very personal one with clients. We will sit and talk to them and find out who's important in their life, get some background on those people, and give recommendations as to whether it sounds like that person would be a good fit, because a power of attorney is a very powerful document, and your agent has incredible amount of authority. So we want to make sure that the agent or agents, co-agents that you name are going to be appropriate in those roles.
Sure. And I think also when we think of wills and having a power of attorney, that's something that you do when you're older. But don't you think that should be done when you're younger and start planning that?
Absolutely. And I find people tend to think that once they prepare their will, it's set in stone, and they're not. These are living, breathing documents that should change as your life changes. So it's really not for the senior population, and as you're aging, it's when you're young, particularly people who have young children. They need to think about who would be guardian for their children in the event that they pass.
Sure,
So
definitely.
it is not just for seniors. It is for anyone over the age of 18, really,
Wow.
who should have a will and powers of attorney.
And how about a living will? What's the difference of having that from these other
That's a great
items?
question. So there's the financial power of attorney and then a healthcare power of attorney, where you name an agent who would make healthcare decisions for you in the event that you're not able to make them for yourself. Those aren't necessarily end-of-life decisions. Those end-of-life decisions are contained in the living will. That is a document where you specify the treatments that you would find acceptable or not acceptable if you are in an end-of-life stage.
Okay.
So then you are saying, yes, I would want this type of treatment, or no, I would not. And then you direct whether your healthcare agent must follow your instructions or whether you want the instructions to be guidance and they can make another decision if they felt it appropriate at that time.
Okay. So you could have a will, a power of attorney, and a living will?
There are three documents that really make up the basis of any estate plan. That is your will, your durable power of attorney, which is for finance,
Okay.
and then your healthcare power of attorney. In our practice, we incorporate a living will with the healthcare power of attorney.
Okay.
Our experience is that if you're going in to the hospital with someone's power of attorney, the next question that will be asked of you is, does this patient have a living will? So we combine them in one document because it makes sense
Sure.
to have them together.
Sure.
And you may also hear advanced healthcare directive. That's the language that is used today, but it is a living will, as we all understand that.
Okay. And so you really want to make sure that you pick a person that you trust
Absolutely.
to be in the role of your power of attorney. And
Absolutely.
I'm sure for some people, that's a lot to think about.
It is
if
a
you're
lot
not
to think
married or if
about.
you don't have children.
Absolutely. And we often have clients who will say, I don't know who would be an appropriate agent for me. And so we'll do a lot of talking and come up with, because people tend to think it has to be their spouse or it has to be a family member, but it doesn't. If you have a trusted best friend or professional in your life who may be appropriate to fill that role.
Now, how about when you come up with someone who has waited to do this and now they're living with dementia or the early stages of Alzheimer's? How do you help somebody like that? Or can they even, sign these documents?
Right, and that depends, and that's a very delicate area that as elder law attorneys, we are trained to recognize signs of dementia or incapacity. And it used to be termed incompetent, and now it's termed incapacity. But if someone has dementia, that doesn't necessarily preclude them from signing a will, but they need to understand what they're signing and why they're signing it at the time.
Okay.
Okay. But if someone does not have capacity, they don't have the ability to understand and communicate the decisions that they're making, then they could not sign. And sadly, in those cases, and I am a contracted attorney with the Department of Aging here in Chester County, in those cases, we then need to go and file a guardianship action because the person doesn't have anyone who they have named to act for them. So often, if there is a discharge from a hospital or someone needs help with their finances and they don't have capacity and they have never signed a power of attorney, we need to go into court and have a guardian appointed.
Okay. And what's the difference between a power of attorney and a guardian?
Well, a guardian is a person who is appointed by the court, and that person manages either your estate, meaning your finances, or your person. So your guardian may also be charged with making healthcare decisions for you, decisions on where you live, all of the personal decisions that you would otherwise make yourself.
Okay.
So it's important, the powers of attorney really give you the control to decide who will be taking on those important roles in your life.
Sure.
And without them, it could end up in the hands of a guardian that you don't even know.
So it's really important that somebody sets all of this up as early as maybe 18 to start working on this.
Absolutely.
And as you were saying, you can make changes. It's not set in stone. It's a living, breathing document. So you just keep it going. So this was really interesting. But I did want to talk about another topic, and that's protecting our assets. And, you know, today people are living longer with the advances in medicine, you know, the people are living into their hundreds and such. And then also right now, the baby boomers are really entering into that next part of their lives, into the becoming senior citizens. So it's such a growing population of people who are aging. And so protecting their assets is so important. So tell us a little bit about protecting your assets and what somebody should be thinking about.
Sure. So I believe that a collaborative approach to estate planning and asset protection is very important. So for example, if a client has a financial advisor that they have worked with routinely, we team together so that the financial advisor can help make good financial and investment decisions in coordination with my work with that client, establishing an estate plan. So a lot of focus is on how do I protect my assets so they don't get paid to a nursing home.
Sure.
And that's a very delicate balance. There are some trusts and some vehicles that will accomplish that, but you also have to be careful about putting assets into a trust. For example, an irrevocable trust, those assets are no longer yours, and you lose control over those assets. So there are revocable trusts, there are irrevocable trusts. It's very important to sit down with an elder law attorney and also involve your financial advisor if you have one, because there are, for every action, there's a reaction, right?
No, exactly.
And so you have to, a lot of times people will think, well, if I add my child's name to the deed, then it is not completely in my name and it will protect it. Well, what you've done by adding a child to your deed is you have gifted them half the value of your estate. And that could come back later to be a unwise decision if you're looking for or if you need Medicaid. If that transfer has happened within 5 years of you needing Medicaid, that will put you in a position of ineligibility because it was a gift.
Sure.
We usually think of gifts as something in a box, right? But
exactly.
a gift can be a transfer of any asset, including, even if you put someone on your bank account with you, that is a gift of half the value in that bank account.
And I've heard that you would have, if you were to do that for your child, that would need to be done years in advance before you would decide to take the next step to move into a community or something like that.
Absolutely.
So you can't just, make the decision of moving to a community and now all of a sudden you want to protect assets.
That's right.
And you just put somebody, on your child on your bank account or
Right.
on your deed.
Pre-planning is so important, because if we are at the end of a situation where the strategies that were otherwise available are no longer appropriate.
Sure.
So planning early is the key.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you brought up Medicaid. And so, I don't know if people realize in the state of Pennsylvania that to go into a personal care home, it's private pay.
Correct.
They don't accept Medicare, Medicaid. How about for nursing homes and skilled nursing communities?
Well, and maybe we should back up a little bit.
Sure.
and talk about the difference, because Medicaid and Medicare, they sound the same,
Yes.
and people confuse them, and they're actually very different. So Medicare is a federal program that provides insurance to people 65 and over. And typically people have been paying into Medicare during their entire working life. And especially right now, we're hearing a lot of TV commercials about Medicare supplement plans.
yes.
There are various parts of Medicare, and it covers hospital, doctors. If you have Part D, then of course that's the drugs. But then there's a lot of talk about the supplemental, the Advantage plans, to cover the gaps, if you will, in
Sure.
Medicare. Medicaid is a federal and a state program that provides assistance to needy seniors or disabled people. So Medicaid is not insurance, and there are very strict guidelines as to assets that you can own and income that you can receive in order to qualify for Medicaid.
Okay.
Okay.
And I know it's very complex, and there are many seminars and different places that people can go to get information on that. And as an elder law attorney, you can provide some help
Absolutely.
in navigating both of those.
Yes, absolutely. We do both. And for Medicaid planning, again, we need to start early.
Sure.
And it's very stringent as to the assets that you can transfer, when you can transfer them. As I mentioned, in Pennsylvania, there is a 5-year look back. So when you are ready to apply for Medicaid, the County Assistance Office, which is the agency through which it's administered, they will look back for 5 years through your bank statements and your financial records to see if you have made any transfers for less than fair market value, a gift.
Okay, sure.
So then if you have, then there is a computation that will calculate the value of the gift, the daily rate of care, and the number of exact days that you would be ineligible to receive Medicaid. So it's incredibly important to work with an elder law attorney who knows all
Sure.
of those asset limits. In Pennsylvania, I should say that Medicaid is referred to as medical assistance, or MA. So you may hear that term as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then for a skilled nursing community or nursing home, can they use Medicaid?
They can. Not every skilled care facility accepts Medicaid.
Okay.
And it's very important to find out
Sure.
before you enter a community, because at that stage, transfers and changes are very difficult. So you want to make sure that where you go is a place that you can stay. So you need to find out, does this facility accept Medicaid, and not that many do.
Okay, good to know. We could talk about this topic for the full show, but I definitely want to touch on something that is very important, and that's elder abuse, which is very sad. Looking at statistics, millions of Americans, older Americans, are abused every year. And a lot of times the abuse is done by their caregivers.
Right.
So as an elder law attorney, how do you help individuals with these situations?
And you're right, it is a growing area and a very sad one. I am one of the founding members of the Elder Abuse Task Force in Chester County, which is made up of people in the legal profession, law enforcement, banks, financial institutions, anyone who has contact with seniors and may be able to identify abuse. And there's various forms of abuse.
Sure, it goes beyond the physical.
Absolutely. Beyond the physical, beyond the sexual, there is emotional abuse, there is financial abuse and exploitation, which sadly is very prevalent. And then there's neglect. So it's not always an overt action. It can be neglecting to care for someone, a care-dependent person.
And how does somebody, if somebody knows that this is going on, how do they report an abuse situation, and do they have to give their information? Can they remain anonymous?
So that's a great question, and I say we, again, work with the Department of Aging in Chester County, and the reports come in from a variety of people. We have received reports from a mailman who noticed that the resident wasn't coming to the door, or noticed a lot of unusual deliveries being made, and it turned out that someone was abusing her credit card and ordering all of these products online. It can be banks where all of a sudden an older adult appears with someone and is making large withdrawals. And it may appear to the teller that the older adult isn't really understanding what's happening.
What's going on.
So they are all, a reporter can be anyone.
So we all have to keep an eye out for our family members, neighbors, and just people we just happen to see or interact with, like the mail carrier.
Right.
That. I love that.
Yes, and it's so important. And we tend to feel like, oh, maybe it's not my business, or I shouldn't get involved. If you call every county has a Department of Aging. And if you call and make a report, it's called a report of need. And you don't need a lot of hard facts, but you can just say, this is what I'm observing, these are my concerns. And it's important for people to know that those reports, the reporter remains anonymous.
That's good.
Always.
Good.
So when we're in court and people try to get information, well, who made this report? It is absolutely protected. And the judges are aware of it. You can't force anyone at the Department of Aging to reveal who may have made a report.
And that's so important for people to know that, so they feel comfortable to step up and report this, because this could be a life or death situation that somebody's in.
Absolutely.
So it's important that people, do voice that.
Right. The other thing that the task force focuses on, and every year we do an elder law day where we talk about the various scams that target seniors. And that has become a major problem. And it is involving law enforcement and people who are getting scammed over the phone, or lottery winnings where people think that if they send money in. So it's important to always be
on the lookout.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And I mentioned that a lot of times the caregivers are the ones that are causing the abuse. So What happens in those cases? What happens to those caregivers? And then what happens to those seniors who are depending on those caregivers?
Well, neglect of a care-dependent person is a crime, and the abuser is subject to criminal sanctions. It's a very serious matter, and law enforcement is getting more and more involved, which is
Good.
great.
Yeah.
Especially financial exploitation. It's not always done by a stranger. It can be done, sadly, by someone who is abusing a power of attorney.
Oh, wow.
It could be your agent who has the authority to go into your bank account. So it's not always a stranger.
Sure.
It's someone that you trust.
Yes, yeah.
And it doesn't always start out with a nefarious reason. The economic downturn in 2008, the older population had funds. The next generation was the generation who was getting laid off, experiencing financial difficulty.
Sure.
And, well, I have mom's power of attorney. I'm just going to take what I need to get through this month.
Yeah.
And it snowballs.
Sure.
And they didn't intend to steal from their mom, but they were trying to make their own ends meet.
Sure.
And typically that would be considered, well, that's a civil matter because it involves a power of attorney. But it's an abuse of the power of attorney, and it is now being considered as a criminal action.
Sure. Wow. It's so much and so
is so
complex.
much.
And like I said, it's just so important, as we were discussing, that people do come up and take that step and report any abuse that they see happening. So we are almost out of time
Oh my
already.
gosh,
This time went by so fast. I was so worried for the first show if how it was going to go, but it went by very quickly, and all this was great.
I'm so glad that you're producing this show because there's so much good information and it's important to get it out to seniors, and as you say, and the people who love and care for them.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much.
It has been my pleasure.
Being my first guest. It was great having you here.
Thank you.
So, as we close the first show, thank you for watching. I look forward to bringing you more in-depth conversations on senior topics. Until next time.